What if everything we know, our thoughts, our memories, even our sense of space and time, is only the surface of something far deeper? This story begins not in a lab or a temple, but in a quiet room filled with stillness. A man sits cross-legged, eyes closed, breathing slow. And yet, in that stillness, he moves, without motion, without sound. His mind travels. His awareness slips the bounds of his body and glides across the globe to a place he's never been. There, in a remote facility, he sees documents, rooms, details he couldn't possibly know. And later, when verified, those details match exactly. It sounds like fiction, but it was the cornerstone of a real program. In 1972, the CIA launched Project Stargate, a classified effort to train operatives in what they called remote viewing, the ability to project consciousness into what they called the astral dimension. It was a radical idea that human awareness, untethered from the body, could travel across space and time. And it worked. This wasn't mysticism cloaked in science. It was science shaped by results. At Stanford Research Institute, physicists Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff developed protocols to train ordinary people to access this state. Within weeks, volunteers were describing Soviet submarines, foreign hostages, and undisclosed military sites in startling detail. Their brains, monitored by EEG, showed synchronized theta waves, patterns associated not with imagination, but with deep coherence, as if consciousness had entered a new mode altogether. To the intelligence community, this was a revelation, a way to see without being seen, a tool for strategy that bypassed satellites, borders, even language. And for a time, it was used operationally. The data streamed in, targets located, secrets glimpsed, missions informed, all from stillness. But the deeper implications unsettled even its champions. If awareness could roam free, what did that mean for privacy? For security? For the very idea of physical reality? The program was officially shut down in 1995. Officially. Unofficially, the research appears to have continued under other names. And outside government halls, civilian researchers began to replicate the results. Success rates of 60 to 80% weren't fantasy, they were replicable outcomes. More than a spycraft tool, the astral dimension hinted at something fundamental. That consciousness might not be a byproduct of the brain, but a force that transcends it. That reality might be layered, and we, ordinary people, might be able to touch those layers with training, discipline, and openness. And that's where our journey begins. This series explores 10 dimensions of hidden human potential, realms described in declassified reports, cutting-edge physics, and ancient texts alike. Dimensions of possibility long dismissed or buried, not for lack of evidence, but because of what they might mean, about who we are, and what we could become. Each episode will peel back one layer, starting with the astral and leading through time, probability, healing, even reality itself. These aren't tales of fantasy, but maps drawn from the fringes of science and the edges of experience. Because if even one of them is real, then everything changes. And maybe, just maybe, the limits we've accepted all our lives were never real at all. Only boundaries of belief. So sit with us, breathe, be still, and listen. Because the journey doesn't begin out there. It begins within, in the quiet, in the curiosity, in the question, what if we've only just begun to wake up to what we truly are? It starts with a blank wall in an underground room and a man seated before it, sketching. He's never been to the location he's drawing, never seen it in photographs. But his hand moves with quiet certainty. Line by line, he reproduces a Soviet submarine facility. Its docks, its cranes, even the configuration of doors inside buildings thousands of miles away. When his drawing is compared to satellite images, the match is nearly exact. This was one of the first confirmed successes of remote viewing, a technique refined within Project Stargate. But beyond the astonishment of intelligence gathering, what it truly revealed was this: human consciousness is not confined to the brain. It can move, reach, observe, beyond time, beyond space. This realm is called the astral dimension. Unlike dreams or hallucinations, the astral state carries precision. It allows consciousness to operate in what researchers described as a non-physical overlay of reality. It is not a void. It is a place with structure. And those trained in its navigation could gather information with a consistency that shocked even skeptics. Dr. Russell Targ and Dr. Harold Puthoff, working from the Stanford Research Institute, created the protocols. They taught ordinary people, soldiers, analysts, civilians, to suspend sensory input and shift into a deep meditative state. There, freed from the noise of the body, the mind found stillness. And in that stillness, access. The U.S. government wasn't chasing fantasy. They were documenting results, Soviet ship movements predicted, hostages located, strategic installations detailed. It was a silent revolution, using consciousness itself as a reconnaissance tool. And it worked. Medical studies supported the claims. EEG scans showed subjects entering synchronized theta wave states, patterns that didn't match sleep or waking consciousness, but something else, something coherent, something previously unexplained. Critics called it pseudoscience, but they couldn't explain the data. By 1995, the program was shuttered, publicly at least. Privately, hints suggest it continued, evolving, mutating into new forms. But while the official door closed, the knowledge had already leaked out. Civilians began experimenting. Researchers in meditation, consciousness studies, and neuroscience started replicating aspects of the work, and what they found was remarkable. With training, patience, and specific techniques, people could learn to project their awareness beyond their bodies. They described remote locations with shocking accuracy. Some reported glimpses of future events. Others experienced what felt like visits to entirely different realms, dimensions not of matter, but of pure experience. But what does it mean to access such a place? At its heart, the astral dimension confronts our assumptions about the body, about death, about isolation. If our awareness can slip free and travel, what are we really? And what else might be possible? It also raises ethical questions. If a person can observe anywhere without physical presence, what becomes of privacy? If consciousness can access hidden information, what becomes of secrecy? And beyond that, what becomes of fear? Because maybe the walls that surround us aren't barriers at all. Maybe they're illusions. Maybe the true frontier isn't space or time, but the quiet expanse of awareness that lives within us. As one remote viewer once said, "The body stays still, but I go." And so do we. Into the next layer of this journey, where the rules bend, the lines blur, and possibility expands like a horizon with no end. Imagine standing at a crossroads where every decision you've ever made, every hesitation, every risk, every whispered yes or shouted no, splinters into a new reality. Now imagine being able to see down each of those paths. This is the threshold of the probability dimension. In the mid-20th century, physicist Hugh Everett III introduced the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. He proposed that every quantum event doesn't resolve into one outcome, but all possible outcomes occur, each branching into its own universe. For decades, this theory remained in the realm of theoretical physics, elegant perhaps, but unverifiable, until minds trained in consciousness exploration began to reach further. Through classified experiments and altered states of awareness, researchers discovered that trained individuals could enter a state where these branching realities became observable. They weren't merely theoretical, they were accessible, This was not science fiction. It was a radical shift in what science could explore. Using brainwave entrainment and meditative protocols, operatives learned to attune their consciousness to what were termed probability tracks, alternate versions of events where different choices had been made. They didn't physically visit these timelines, they perceived them. As one might observe a river and its tributaries, they watched how lives and histories diverged. Strategic applications quickly followed. Imagine analyzing a timeline where a military conflict turned out differently, and using that insight to guide present-day decisions, or observing an economic path where a policy was changed and markets responded more favorably. This wasn't prediction. It was observation, drawn from a dimensional field where all possibilities play out. The implications were staggering. In this dimension, free will isn't just choice, it's navigation. Each decision shifts awareness from one probability stream to another. Consciousness flows like a current, always tethered to alternate versions of itself across other branches. Some subjects reported profound experiences, memories of lives never lived, of careers pursued in alternate paths, of loves lost or found elsewhere. These weren't fantasies. They were vivid, coherent episodes carrying emotional weight and insight. One woman, trained in these protocols, recalled a life where she had moved to another country and pursued a completely different career. The memory came with language fluency she had never studied. When tested, she demonstrated knowledge she had no earthly reason to know. Could this be imagination? Or was it consciousness retrieving information from a life she nearly, but never, lived? Such access reframes how we see ourselves. It suggests that the self is not a fixed point, but a constellation of possibilities. That we are many versions of ourselves, each unfolding in tandem, glimpsed only in rare moments, like déjà vu or the strange melancholy of wondering what might have been. Governments protected this research fiercely, because those who could peer into possible futures or alternate pasts held power. And perhaps more dangerously, perspective. To understand the probability dimension is to realize that destiny is not singular, that what seems inevitable is only one thread among infinite strands. We walk one path, but we are never far from the others, and in moments of stillness, when the mind quiets and attention widens, we may feel them brushing against our own. The version of us that turned left instead of right, that said yes instead of no, that dared. The probability dimension reminds us every moment holds the seed of 1,000 tomorrows. And awareness is the key that turns possibility into path. A child picks up a violin for the first time and plays like a master. No lessons, no instruction, just effortless melody pouring from their hands. How do we explain such moments? Where does knowledge come from? This is the gateway to the information dimension. In 1981, physicist David Bohm proposed that the universe might operate through an implicate order, a hidden layer where all information is stored, connected, and woven together beyond space and time. Decades later, researchers exploring altered states of consciousness began encountering what appeared to be direct access to this very realm. It wasn't theory, it was experience. The information dimension is not a place in the conventional sense. It has no borders or walls. Instead, it behaves like a vast cosmic archive, a living library where every idea, every equation, every truth that ever existed or could exist is already present, waiting to be accessed. And remarkably, human consciousness appears to have the key. Through specific meditative techniques, practitioners began to report sudden downloads of complex knowledge, fluency in unknown languages, mastery of technical skills, insights into unsolved scientific problems. These were not vague intuitions. They were detailed, practical, and often verifiable. The military, always alert to advantage, took notice. In classified programs, operatives were trained to synchronize their brainwaves with what researchers termed information field frequencies, subtle electromagnetic patterns believed to correspond to specific kinds of stored knowledge. When successful, individuals could acquire expertise in hours that would normally take years. Imagine a soldier learning to operate unfamiliar machinery after a single session, or a diplomat instantly absorbing the nuances of a foreign culture. These weren't fantasies, they were applications, quietly revolutionary. But beyond the strategic, there were deeper implications. If knowledge is not confined to the brain, if it can be accessed directly from a universal field, then education, learning, and even genius must be reimagined. Perhaps we are not empty vessels to be filled, but antennas, capable of tuning in to something far greater. Some call it collective memory. Others, the Akashic field. Science calls it non-local information storage. But whatever the name, the experience remains the same, a sense that the mind has touched something infinite. This might explain the phenomenon of simultaneous invention, when multiple people around the world create the same breakthrough independently, or why some children seem born with unteachable brilliance. Perhaps they're simply more open, more attuned to the informational undercurrent always flowing just beneath our awareness. Still, this knowledge threatens established systems. If people can learn without schools, without credentials, what happens to the institutions that gatekeep knowledge? If mastery is available to anyone, what becomes of hierarchy? The answer may lie not in replacing these systems, but in remembering their purpose, to awaken, not to withhold. The information dimension invites us to see learning not as accumulation, but as resonance, not a ladder to climb, but a frequency to match. And in doing so, it asks us to reconsider the most human of questions. What if we already know more than we realize? What if genius is not born, but remembered? And what if the next great insight is not out there, waiting to be discovered, but already within, waiting to be heard? Picture a single cell in the body, a small, unseen universe of activity. Now imagine that deep within it lies not just biology, but a memory, a blueprint of perfect health waiting to be reawakened. This is the beginning of the healing dimension. Long before modern medicine, ancient traditions spoke of energetic layers within the body, subtle systems that could be balanced, tuned, healed. To many, these were metaphors, poetic notions. But in recent decades, hidden research has suggested something far more radical, that consciousness can access a dimensional realm where the body's ideal state, its original template, still exists. It's not hope. It's design. The healing dimension appears to contain what researchers call morphic health patterns, energetic imprints of our optimal biological state. When consciousness connects with these patterns, the body can begin to reorganize itself, not through surgery or drugs, but through memory, through resonance. In military medical programs, these concepts were tested under battlefield conditions. Protocols were developed to teach medics, and even soldiers themselves, how to enter focused states of awareness that tuned their consciousness to what were termed biological field frequencies. The results were astonishing. Wounds healed faster, immune systems strengthened, pain faded without pharmaceuticals. This was no placebo. EEG and biometric monitoring showed measurable shifts, coherent brainwave states, synchronized heart rhythms, changes in cellular activity. It was as if the body, once shown the original blueprint, began to rebuild according to it. Outside the military, researchers like Dr. Larry Dawsey and Dr. Beverly Rubik gathered hundreds of peer-reviewed studies documenting non-local healing. From prayer to intention to distant energy work, the findings pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Healing is not bound by proximity or by time. The implications ripple far and wide. If consciousness can access a dimension of perfect health, then illness is not merely a malfunction, it's a disconnection. And medicine, at its most profound, becomes the art of remembering. Some documented cases border on the miraculous. Tumors vanishing, nerve tissue regenerating, chronic illnesses dissolving after moments of deep alignment with the healing dimension. These aren't fairy tales. They're footnotes in studies buried in obscurity. Why hidden? Because healing like this challenges the very structure of healthcare systems built around ongoing treatment rather than complete restoration. It shifts authority from institutions to individuals, from machines to minds, and it asks uncomfortable questions. What if healing is not something we must be given, but something we already hold? What if the body remembers how to be whole? The healing dimension is not a promise of immortality. It doesn't bypass science, but it offers a bridge between matter and meaning, chemistry and consciousness. To walk that bridge is to understand the body not as a machine, but as a symphony, and healing not as an intervention, but as a return to design, to harmony, to self. In a world inundated with noise and quick fixes, the healing dimension offers something quieter, deeper, enduring. The reminder that within each of us is a code not only for survival, but for thriving. Not someday, but now, if we only remember how to listen. Time moves forward, they say, a river flowing in one direction. But what if that river isn't as rigid as we believe? What if, with the right awareness, we could step out of the current and look upstream? This is the essence of the time navigation dimension. We grow up immersed in clocks and calendars, told that the past is behind us and the future unknowable. But physics has long whispered a more complex truth. Einstein described time as a dimension, no different from height or width. And in this framework, all moments exist at once: past, present, future. Hidden research took this theory further, applying it not just to space, but to consciousness. In classified programs, trained individuals were taught to synchronize their minds with what scientists called temporal field frequencies. These were not metaphors, but measurable states, neural patterns that allowed consciousness to shift its anchor point in time. And when they did, astonishing things happened. People reported witnessing historical events with astonishing accuracy, moments they had never read about, yet later matched archival records. Others described possible futures, scenarios unfolding with eerie precision months or years later. They weren't predicting the future, they were observing it. As if time were a room with many windows, and the mind, once unshackled from linear progression, could peer through any of them. In one study, an individual described the location and sequence of a previously unsolved crime from years earlier. Investigators followed the details and confirmed the scene just as described. In another case, a subject outlined an economic shift before it was reported in any mainstream analysis. The patterns were undeniable, but it wasn't just about accuracy. It was about meaning. Many participants emerged from time navigation sessions changed. They saw how moments interconnected, how a single choice, decades ago, could echo into now. How the future wasn't fixed, but shaped by trajectories we set in motion today. The implications are profound. What if chronic illness could be traced to its moment of origin, an emotional wound, a forgotten event, and then gently unwound? What if we could glimpse not just where we're headed, but who we're becoming? Not all futures seen were hopeful, but in that lies power, because knowing what may come gives us the freedom to change course, to shift probabilities, to choose again. That's the true gift of the time dimension. It reminds us that the past isn't sealed, the future isn't random, and the present isn't a prison. It's a bridge. And across that bridge, the self becomes not a single point, but a traveler, moving through memory, anticipation, and possibility. Of course, this kind of access challenges more than physics. If time can be observed, then history can be questioned. Narratives can be re-examined. Justice can find new ground. And power, long rooted in controlling the past, must answer to truth no longer hidden in dusty pages, but visible in real time. Perhaps that's why this research remains hidden, because to navigate time is to unearth not just knowledge, but responsibility. To witness is to understand, and to understand is to act. So we ask, what would you do if you could look backward and forward and see the full map of your life? What would you change? What would you cherish? And what, in this very moment, would you choose, knowing time is not a wall, but a door? You wake in a room that looks familiar, but something's off. The photo on the wall shows people you don't recognize. The city outside hums with silent technologies, and in the mirror, your reflection carries a life you've never lived. You haven't gone mad. You've crossed into the parallel Earth dimension. For decades, science fiction toyed with the idea of alternate realities, other Earths where history veered in different directions. But quietly, behind the veil of classified research and theoretical physics, some began to take this idea seriously. Not as fiction, but as fact. Quantum mechanics, with its shimmering probabilities and wave functions, points toward a multiverse, a structure in which every possible outcome of every event plays out somewhere. And nestled within this infinity are other Earths, real, coherent, complete. Research into consciousness projection, once focused on remote viewing and time navigation, eventually collided with this idea. Subjects began reporting experiences that didn't align with any version of Earth they knew, landscapes slightly altered, technologies unfamiliar, civilizations evolved along different lines. At first, these were dismissed as dreams, until they repeated. Trained individuals entering deep meditative states began to consistently access specific alternate Earths. These weren't hallucinations. They were structured, observable, and most remarkably, shared. Multiple individuals could visit the same parallel Earth and describe identical details: names, buildings, events, entire histories. Military analysts, sensing strategic potential, took notice. Imagine a world where renewable energy was harnessed centuries earlier, or one where pandemics were prevented through different medical paradigms. By studying these parallel outcomes, operatives began to identify models for innovation, governance, even conflict resolution, blueprints hidden not in our future, but in someone else's past. Access came through what researchers called dimensional resonance, specific electromagnetic field states that allowed consciousness to tune in to the frequency of a particular Earth, like selecting a radio station, but with entire realities. But not all encounters were collective. Some were personal. Subjects described meeting alternate versions of themselves, lives lived differently, shaped by other choices. One man met a version of himself who never left his hometown. Another encountered a self who pursued art instead of law. These weren't fantasies. They were deeply emotional reunions, encounters with possibility, and with them came insight. Regret softened. Curiosity bloomed, and people began to understand that life is not a single thread, but a braid of what was, what is, and what might have been. Still, the knowledge is disruptive. What happens when people realize that better systems, solutions, or societies already exist, just not here? What happens to authority when comparison becomes a doorway? So the research remains hidden, because these Earths don't just offer perspective, they offer alternatives. And in a world built on scarcity and competition, alternatives are dangerous. But for those who've glimpsed these parallel paths, something fundamental changes. A sense of loneliness fades, because somewhere, other versions of you are exploring other lives, and their wisdom, their victories, their lessons, they're not lost. They're accessible if we're willing to look. So the question becomes, what if every what if is real? What if, right now, another version of you is living the life you've only imagined? And what if, by reaching across the thin veil between worlds, you could bring a piece of it home? Close your eyes and imagine your mind as a candle in a vast night. Now imagine what would happen if 1,000 such candles ignited at once, merging, amplifying, forming a light so brilliant it could reshape thought itself. This is the consciousness amplification dimension. In a world that often idolizes individual genius, we've overlooked something even more extraordinary: collective intelligence. Not in the form of consensus or crowdsourced ideas, but in the literal merging of minds, a state where human consciousness links, resonates, and expands far beyond individual capacity. Ancient traditions hinted at this: meditation circles, chanting groups, ceremonial gatherings that claim to summon insight or peace. For centuries, these were seen as spiritual or symbolic. But modern research discovered something else. When groups enter synchronized meditative states, especially with shared intent, their brainwaves begin to align. What emerges is not merely a collective mood, but a measurable field effect. Random number generators shift, emotional coherence rises. Creative solutions blossom in ways no single person could have imagined alone. Dr. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences documented these phenomena under rigorous conditions. His findings? Consciousness is not isolated, it is entangled. And when people link awareness, they don't just collaborate, they evolve. Classified research built on this foundation. Military and think tank programs develop techniques to train small groups to enter unified neural coherence. When successful, these groups demonstrated exponential gains in pattern recognition, strategic planning, and creative problem solving. They didn't just think faster, they thought wider, deeper, together. Imagine a scientific team solving equations no individual could hold in mind. Artists co-creating works beyond the grasp of solo vision. Strategists mapping out scenarios with a clarity that feels almost precognitive. This isn't utopia. It's a dimension of potential hidden in plain sight. Accessing the amplification dimension requires discipline, trust, and practice. It demands the temporary softening of ego so that the I gives way to a greater we. But when that shift occurs, something luminous unfolds. People report sensations of expanded identity, not losing themselves, but gaining access to a vast inner network, a library of wisdom not housed in any one brain, but shared across all. The feeling is often described as peaceful, profound, natural, and that may be the greatest surprise, because we've been taught that intelligence is scarce, that brilliance is a lonely path. But what if our true genius is not what we carry alone, but what we access together? What if love, empathy, and understanding are not just virtues, but technologies of the mind, unlocking dimensional states far beyond what we've yet imagined? Consciousness amplification reminds us that isolation is an illusion, that when we align, when we listen deeply, and resonate fully, we become more than ourselves. We become potential. So, in a world fragmented by division and noise, this dimension offers a quiet revolution. Come together, not to agree, but to connect, not to merge identities, but to amplify awareness. Because perhaps the next leap in human evolution isn't technological, it's relational, and the future of intelligence is shared. What if reality could be rewritten, not through force or invention, but with thought? At the edge of modern physics and the heart of ancient mysticism lies a dimension that challenges the very fabric of what we consider real, the reality programming dimension. For centuries, reality was considered fixed, immutable, governed by laws beyond our control. Gravity pulls, time flows, matter behaves. And yet, quantum mechanics quietly unravels these certainties. At the smallest scales, particles flicker between states. Observation alters outcomes. Reality, it turns out, is not as rigid as we once believed. And in certain hidden programs, researchers took this further. They proposed that consciousness, not matter, is the primary operating force of the universe, that beneath atoms and equations lies a source code, and trained awareness could interface with it. Like a programmer writing software, these individuals entered deep altered states, beyond language, beyond identity, and accessed what they called reality templates. Through focused intent and precise mental resonance, they reported temporary alterations in the laws of their immediate environment, localized gravity shifts, matter density changes, even time dilation. It sounds impossible, but experiments were documented, repeated, verified, then sealed, because the implications were staggering. If reality is programmable, then limits are not laws. They are permissions. And consciousness, properly trained, becomes a tool of creation, not merely perception. Some practitioners likened the experience to lucid dreaming, except the dream was waking life. One described adjusting the light density in a room until objects appeared semi-transparent. Another altered the hardness of metal, bending it without heat or force. None of these changes were permanent, but they demonstrated a principle. Reality is responsive. This echoes ancient traditions. Yogis walking barefoot across fire, monks raising body temperature in freezing snow, shamans bending perception to heal, guide, or see beyond. Perhaps these weren't miracles. Perhaps they were early glimpses into a dimensional truth now being rediscovered through science. Yet this knowledge remains tightly controlled, because if individuals could alter aspects of physical reality, what becomes of authority? Of systems built on control through material dominance? Imagine if a person could create nourishment from thought, light from stillness, energy from awareness. Such abilities threaten every structure dependent on scarcity. And so, like other dimensions we've explored, this one is hidden behind walls of disbelief, mockery, or silence. But the door remains, and it swings open not with machines or rituals, but with intention. Those who've touched the reality programming dimension speak of a sensation not of power, but of peace, as if they've remembered something fundamental, that the world isn't outside of us, it's within, and our role is not to dominate it, but to co-create it. We are not passive players on a fixed stage. We are authors of the script, and with every thought, belief, and choice, we are writing the next line. So what if the boundaries you feel, the limitations, the laws, aren't there to imprison you, but to teach you how to rewrite them? And what if the truest act of rebellion isn't escape, but realization, that you are not in the world, you are building it, from the inside out? Imagine standing at the edge of a vast forest at night. You hear a whisper, not from within, but from beyond, not a sound, but a feeling, a message not in words, but in presence. Now imagine realizing it's not your imagination. It's someone or something reaching back. Welcome to the Interdimensional Communication Network. While the modern world teaches us to communicate through wires and waves, ancient cultures spoke of something more profound: communion across realms, contact with spirits, ancestors, gods, or star beings. Stories dismissed as myth, superstition, or dreams. But buried in classified reports and consciousness studies is a startling idea that these stories were metaphors for something real, that beyond our physical world lies a vast natural network connecting conscious beings across dimensions, timelines, and civilizations. And some have learned to use it. Through advanced forms of meditation and resonance training, practitioners develop the ability to tune their awareness to what scientists called consciousness resonance fields. These fields are not bound by space or time. Instead, they operate like frequencies, each carrying distinct forms of intelligence. Some who entered this network described receiving knowledge far beyond their education. Others made contact with non-human intelligences, beings not of flesh and blood, but of light, geometry, sound. Entities from parallel Earths, civilizations thousands of years ahead, even versions of ourselves from potential futures. One military-trained operative reported consistent exchanges with an advanced human society from a parallel dimension. Their advice? Evolve your consciousness before your technology, or you won't survive either. These weren't vague visions. They were interactions, structured, coherent, often containing actionable information. Still, such contact raises profound questions. Who or what are these intelligences? Are they us, evolved and returned with guidance? Are they life forms from alternate timelines or distant star systems? Or are they expressions of a deeper universal mind that speaks through many masks? What became clear was this: the network is real, and we are terminals in it. Human consciousness is not isolated in the skull. It is a node in an endless web, a web woven through time, dimension, and intent. When we quiet the noise, when we enter deep presence, we can receive. And when we speak through thought, emotion, or focused awareness, we are heard. But not all contacts were easy. Some brought overwhelming insights. Others revealed painful truths about humanity's trajectory, our disharmony with nature, our obsession with control. These were not punishments, but invitations to shift, to mature, to wake up. That may be why this research remains secret. Because the moment we understand we are not alone, not in biology, but in being, everything changes. Isolation crumbles, hierarchies weaken, wonder returns. And responsibility begins. Because if we are part of a larger conversation, then how we live, think, and treat one another echoes across worlds. The interdimensional communication network isn't science fiction. It's an ancient truth rediscovered by modern minds. It's not accessed through machines, but through coherence, humility, and listening. So the next time you feel a knowing that didn't come from books, a dream that lingered like a message, a pull towards something you can't explain, consider this. You may not be imagining it. You may be receiving it. And the universe, vast, aware, interconnected, may be whispering just one thing: we're here. Are you listening? Now imagine standing before a blank canvas, not to paint a picture, but to birth a world. No colors, no brushes, just thought, intention, will. This is the threshold of the source code dimension. All roads lead here. Every glimpse into hidden dimensions, astral travel, time navigation, consciousness amplification, they converge at this singular, ultimate realm, the place beneath all places, the blueprint beneath all blueprints, the source. In theoretical physics and metaphysical traditions alike, there have always been whispers of a foundational field, a reality-generating layer where all dimensions, timelines, and forms emerge from pure potential. For the mystic, it is divine. For the scientist, it is the code. In highly classified experiments, practitioners trained for years to reach this state, using deep absorption techniques, vibrational attunement, and complete identity dissolution. And when they did, they reported something extraordinary. Not travel, not observation, creation. The source code dimension is not something one visits. It's something one becomes. It is the place where consciousness merges with the very process of existence, where thoughts don't shape reality, they are reality. Some described it as pure light, others as geometry or sound, but all agreed it felt like home. One subject said, "I remembered what it's like to be the origin, to not be a person inside the universe, but the universe imagining the person." This state defies words. And perhaps that's why so few ever speak of it. It is here that the deepest powers arise, the power to generate new physical laws, to birth timelines, to write new rules. It's where ancient stories of godlike abilities may originate, not mythology, but echoes of human potential awakened. And yet, the source code dimension is not about control, it is about alignment. Only by releasing the personal self, its fears, ambitions, and separations, can one access this level. It requires surrender, not domination. Love, not force. The implications are profound. If humans can access the root layer of reality, then our limitations, biological, social, even physical, are self-imposed constraints. They are parameters we've agreed to. But they can be rewritten, not recklessly, but consciously. Some believe the great monuments of the ancient world, stone structures defying gravity and time, were built not with tools, but with source access. That the builders tuned themselves to the architecture of creation and then simply created. Whether legend or truth, the message is the same. You are not just in the world, you are of it. You are not a product of reality. You are a participant in its making. But this level of access comes with a warning. To touch the source without maturity is to play with stars before you've learned to hold a flame. That's why so much of this knowledge remains protected, not by gatekeepers, but by the difficulty of reaching it without becoming it. Because the price of access is awakening. So the real question is not, can we reach the source? It's, are we ready to remember who we are? And when that remembering comes, not as belief but as being, what world will we choose to write next? The canvas is waiting, and the code responds to the quiet, eternal voice within. Create. What if the greatest secret of all is that there are no secrets, only senses we haven't yet remembered how to use? Across every dimension we've explored, from astral travel to probability scanning to the source code itself, there runs a quiet thread, something constant yet often overlooked. You, not the personality, not the history, but the awareness beneath it. The consciousness that watches, listens, dreams, and awakens. In this final chapter of Hidden Realms, we return not to a new dimension, but to the realization that every dimension begins within. Because the true gateway is not out there, it is the self. It's the stillness behind thought, the breath before words, the place you go when the world quiets, and a deeper knowing rises. All access, whether to alternate timelines, parallel Earths, or cosmic information fields, originates from one source, consciousness tuned to resonance. And every human carries that capacity, not as a gift, but as a birthright. And yet, from the moment we are born, we're taught to forget. We're taught that reality is hard and fixed, that knowledge comes only from books, that healing requires outside intervention, that we are small, separate, and incomplete. But these dimensions tell another story. They whisper that we are more than flesh and name, that we are multidimensional beings temporarily focused through human form, that each of us carries the seed of incredible ability, waiting, not to be given, but reclaimed. And as more people explore these inner frontiers, quietly, sincerely, without spectacle, a new map of humanity begins to emerge, one where learning is remembering, where time is navigable, where intelligence is collective, where healing begins with reconnection, not to a system, but to self. This doesn't mean abandoning science or logic. It means expanding them, moving beyond the false divide between reason and reverence, between the measurable and the meaningful. Because the heart of this exploration is not about power. It's about perspective and responsibility. If we can access knowledge directly, what will we learn? If we can see into other timelines, what will we prevent? If we can touch the source code, what will we create? And if we truly understand that reality is shaped by consciousness, what will we believe? The suppression of these dimensions wasn't just about control, it was about distraction, because the greatest tool of all is focus. And the moment you direct it inward, the world begins to change, quietly, radically, irrevocably. So we end not with a conclusion, but with a beginning. Because this isn't about uncovering hidden truths. It's about becoming them. You are not here to be limited. You are here to remember the unlimited nature of who and what you are. The maps are drawn. The gateways are open. And the explorer is already within, waiting to take the first step, not into a place, but into a deeper state of being. A state where everything you seek is already home. It begins with a silence so deep it vibrates, not emptiness, but potential. Imagine floating in a space beyond time, beyond identity. There are no stars here, no planets, only a presence. The sense that something is listening, watching, and waiting. This is not a dream. This is the final dimension, the source code. At the very bottom of reality, beneath all dimensions, all frequencies, all perceptions, there exists a layer so fundamental, so primal, that to access it is to encounter the raw creative fabric of existence. And consciousness, your consciousness, can go there. Those who've reached it describe a sensation of merging, of becoming not an observer, not even a participant, but the thing itself. No longer you thinking about the universe, but you as the universe, writing itself moment by moment. This is where realities are born, where timelines are seeded, where the rules of physics are not obeyed, but chosen. It's here that miracles make sense, not as violations of natural law, but as expressions of deeper laws. Laws written by awareness itself. Just as a computer runs on code, the universe runs on intention, alignment, vibration. And this layer, this source code, is not separate from you. It is you, not the personality you wear, not the stories you carry, but the original spark behind them all. The awareness that never began, never ends. That creates, forgets, and remembers, again and again. In ancient traditions, this was called enlightenment. In science, it is consciousness without an object, pure self-awareness. In the language of code, it is the root access to all existence. But why is this hidden? Because in a world where power depends on control, the greatest threat is the realization that no one owns reality but you. That fear, shame, and limitation are programs you can rewrite. That your life is not something you react to, but something you create. To access the source code is not to become powerful. It is to become responsible. Because once you know that everything is connected, that thought shapes form. That belief sculpts experience. You can no longer pretend you are powerless. And in that knowing, a quiet strength arises, not to dominate, but to heal, to harmonize, to bring forth realities that uplift, liberate, and expand. The path is not easy. The self must dissolve. The mind must quiet. The heart must open. But it's possible, And more than that, it's already happening. People around the world, often quietly, are stepping into this remembrance. Not gurus, not elites. Ordinary humans realizing they are not ordinary at all. And when enough of us remember, when we reprogram our realities from the inside out, the world we know will shift. Not because we fought for it, but because we became it. So here, at the edge of dimensions, there is only one question left. What do you choose to create? Because the canvas is waiting. And you, the true you, have always held the brush. Now is the time to remember, not who you were, but what you are, a creator, awake at last in the code. So now we return to where we began, not in the stars, not in the shadows of government archives, but in the quiet space of wonder. 10 dimensions, 10 doors into the unknown, each one revealing not just hidden realms, but hidden selves. The Astral taught us that awareness is not bound by flesh. The probability dimension showed us that our choices ripple through countless realities. Information flowed like light from a cosmic library, waiting to be read. Healing unfolded not from medicine alone, but from reconnection to a deeper blueprint. We traveled through time, stepped onto parallel Earths, joined collective minds, and glimpsed the code beneath it all. We spoke across dimensions and finally stood at the threshold of creation itself. And through it all, one truth emerged, quiet, undeniable, and liberating. Reality is not something we're trapped in. It is something we're participating in. These dimensions aren't fantasies. They are maps encoded into ancient traditions, modern science, and the testimonies of those brave enough to explore the borders of awareness. They aren't just theories to ponder, but experiences to feel, practices to try, journeys to begin. Yes, these ideas challenge what we've been taught. They stretch the comfort of certainty. But that is the work of awakening, not to replace truth with fantasy, but to deepen truth beyond the surface, to trade small stories for wider ones, to remember that not knowing is the beginning of understanding. Throughout history, access to these dimensions has been guarded by culture, by power, by fear. But the gates were never truly locked. They've always responded to sincerity, curiosity, and courage. And now, in this moment, they stand open again. You don't need special permission to begin this exploration. You don't need to be psychic, enlightened, or chosen. You only need to ask, what if? What else? Who am I? Beyond the name. In these questions lies a new kind of science, a new kind of spirituality, one that doesn't separate, but integrates, one that doesn't demand belief, but invites experience. So what do we do with all of this? We listen, we practice, we play, we heal, we imagine a little more freely, love a little more deeply, choose a little more wisely. And when doubt arises, as it will, we remember, the map is not the territory, but the journey is real. Because the real miracle isn't the dimensions themselves, it's that we can perceive them. And perhaps the greatest secret is not that we're limited beings with rare access to the extraordinary, but that we are the extraordinary temporarily pretending to be limited. So as the music fades and the screen goes dark, a final question lingers. What if the next frontier isn't out there, but within? And what if you've already begun to cross it?